Hey guys, Mr. Ridgway here for what is going to be our last large kind of case study of a European country in Africa and some imperialism. So we're going to be jumping into the British in Kenya this lesson. So go ahead, get the warm-up done. Again, please keep signing in with Microsoft because that's really helping me take attendance. Once you do that, let's go in and we'll talk about what our objectives are here in just a second. So a couple of housekeeping things first. If you have not, you need to have taken both your North and Middle Africa map quiz. Also, okay, by the time that you're watching this video, and I'll probably set aside about 5 minutes in class for people to do this, you can go back and you can make corrections on those. So please make sure you've done that. Second, okay, your South Africa, not just the country, like Southern Africa map quiz is coming up next week. So please be preparing for that. All right. So here with Kenya, here's our objectives. Okay, we are going to be looking at the major motives, events, consequences for British colonization of Kenya. Once we do that, okay, we are then going to compare and contrast Ghana and Kenya as a part of the British colonial experience. Now, the first activity that I have on here is a partner reading thing, which we'll get to here in a second. But this is where we're going to now look at the motives and kind of get a good, easy introduction, if you will, into the British colonization of Kenya. So let's just kind of read the overview, and then what I'll have you do is probably just pause the video so you can actually do the reading and some of the annotations that I'd like you to do with it. And then I'll kind of give you some of my thoughts that I notice. Let's read the intro here together, shall we? In Kenya, we get to explore the colonial practice of claiming African lands for white settlers and develop the idea of settler colonies beyond that of what the French did in Algeria. So again, if you remember, Algeria was a settler colony. We're going to kind of take that to the next level and look at this with agriculture and land. Check out the selection below, and it says read it with a partner. As you read, consider why the British instituted these land policies. What were their effects on Africans in Kenya? For example, how did land confiscation limit the ways in which Africans could participate in the colonial economy? Why does it matter? And how did it affect them? So let's take a look here. And again, if you're doing this alone at home, that's totally fine. You don't have to necessarily do this with somebody else. But I will have the students in class go ahead and do that. Okay. So let's get right to it. Okay, Kenya. Who had the right to land in Kenya and why? Okay, so what I'd like you to do at this point, okay, is go ahead, read it yourself. Okay, there are a couple of annotations. I don't want to spoil them. So go ahead, pause this video, do the reading, do the annotations, and then we'll decompress here in a second. So, assuming you pause, you didn't cheat it. You can see here we are in Kenya. Okay, you'll notice a couple of trends here. Number one are the railroads. Okay, again, this is just all good reading strategies. Before I even get in, I just read the title, right? Who had the right to land in Kenya and why? I can see here that we have these railroads and also areas reserved for white settlements. So, of course, we're going to be talking about settler colonies. I see the word plantation is highlighted. That's an important thing. And so right here, this is one of my favorite reading strategies that I have you guys do, and I intentionally put this on the page down because it forces you to actually just do an immediate recall of what you just read without looking back. Good. It's a really, really good practice in terms of retrieving things. So if you see here, okay, and we keep going down here, settle on 3 main points of the reading. Your answers could have varied all over the place here. The things that I picked up here is number one, indirect rule. Okay, the British are going to be ruling similarly to how they did in Ghana. We'll talk about more of that here later. The second is going to be the continuing of the settler colony theme, but the idea of privileging white settlers over that of the native Kenyans. And then getting into an extension of that idea here, which they kind of start to mention up here as well, is the importance of land, especially for growing tea and coffee, and then again, kind of like looking at how labor's happening here. You saw this picture here of African farm laborers cutting sisal, and sisal was kind of used to make like cordage, like rope, as I say here, rope and twine. So connect two topics or themes in the reading to things you already know. You heard me do this actually when I was just reflecting on my answer there, that this is very similar to Ghana, an indirect rule. We've seen that before. Also settler colonies, which we looked at with Algeria, right? And again, you would then write one question you have here from reading this selection, and we'll try to answer some of those in class. With that then, we're going to get to our mini lesson next. Okay. Also, I did put in a couple of things if you get done early and you'd like to see what's coming up here. There's some interactive stuff you can play with, but these are mostly for people in class. So let's carry on. We need to talk about the Mau Mau. Okay. So again, we're going to be kind of looking at here the motives of different players in, again, the struggle for independence and nationalism in the Quester colonies, right? So we're gonna also be talking here a lot about the lenses that we're gonna be using to look at the Mau Mau, because that is incredibly important, because it only happened back in the 1960s, late 50s, 1960s. So it's pretty recent, and then we do need to talk about the lenses into things, and then also we're gonna look at the strategies that the British are going to use here when they give up, in a way, indirect control, and how they're going to try to put the Mau Mau down. Okay, so let's first get to what is going to cause the Mau Mau rebellion. Okay, the thing you want to first of all realize is that, like nearly almost all things in Africa, the Mau Mau is going to the Mau Mau rebellion is going to come back to the struggles over land and labor. Okay, and so let's talk about and kind of summarize what you saw there in the reading and kind of tie this into we're going to kind of accelerate through the world wars and kind of tie it all together here. So in Kenya, okay, the British solve actually the land problem in terms of ownership quite easily. They just take it from the best arable land from the native Kenyans, and they just give it to their own white settlers. Okay, and the British encourage settlement in Kenya, specifically because at this time actually the British Empire valued Uganda as a much more valuable place, and so on those railroad routes that were going to Uganda, that's kind of why the whole Kenyan settlement thing kind of crops up. And they're going to give the best land for farming, especially, to white settlers. Now, that then brings us to the second problem. How are you going to farm the land? And for the British, they have to come up with a solution for this, because, again, the British being the British, they're not going to farm it themselves. And if you have, unlike Ghana, where the British did not own land, and land was held onto by native Ghanaians, here it's owned by Europeans, but they're not going to work it. So here's the solution. They would first of all prevent any Kenyans from growing their own tea and coffee. That's strat number one. But then strat number two, and how they kind of manage to create this workforce that's going to work for them, is they force most Kenyans into slums where they can barely eke out a living. And these, think of them like preservation areas or preserves. It's very similar to what the United States does to Native Americans, for example. And what happens then is, because they're barely able to eke out a living, they don't have much of a choice except to go to work for whites, the British, landowners in the colony, and they get put to work in these large plantations, again for very minimal wages, growing tea and coffee. Now, the other thing that's going to happen here is world wars. World War II is going to bring these expectations of for Kenyans, because Kenyans are mandated to fight by the British in World War II. that Kenya goes into that coming out, goes into it, and then very volunteering soldiers, and they come out of it expecting that land ownership issues are going to improve. There had been some commissions up until that point, and nothing had really changed. They think the other conditions in Kenya are going to get better as well. Some of the segregation that was done there, and it actually just gets worse. So that then is going to lead us to the Mau Mau. Now, the Mau Mau they're a very interesting rebellion in some ways that is unique to other parts of Africa. I've been listening to a lot of oral interviews of people who lived in Kenya, who were not part of the Mau Mau, and it was just this kind of boogeyman. Like some of them had this kind of opinion of them. But let's actually get to who they are. Let's nail down specifics. The Mau Mau were an anti-colonial terrorist / resistance group, and they are started by a few of those Kenyan World War II vets. And the Mau Mau overwhelmingly come from the largest ethnic group in Kenya, who are called the Kikuyu. Okay, there's many ethnic groups, Somalis and others in Kenya, but the Kikuyu are the largest. And the thing you need to know about the Mau Mau and the Kikuyu is the Kikuyu have a long tradition, going back hundreds of years, of something called oathing. Okay, and typically this would be done like if your tribe was going off to war. You would swear an oath to your own ethnic group, before you went into battle. But in this case, the Mau Mau, they take this idea, so this right here is like a sample of a pledge. There's many different versions of them, but the last line is always the same. It says, "I pledge to kick all Europeans out of Kenya. If I don't, may this oath kill me. I pledge to take up arms against Europeans. If I don't, may this oath kill me. If I reveal the contents of this oath, may this oath kill me." And the secretive part of that nature right there is kind of the big emphasis. So here's what the Mau Mau start to do. They conduct what's called asymmetric attacks. That means they're not going to organize in like super large armies and then fight fight that way. No. They start off small. First, they go and they attack Kenyans. Note who I said there. That we'll talk about their targets here in a second. They target Kenyan loyalists predominantly. The vast majority of their targets are Kenyan loyalists. So what they'll do, for example, is they'll go and they'll hamstring cattle. They will. That means they cut the actual hamstrings of the cattle so the cattle can't walk and they die and are useless. Because again, cattle is a form of wealth in many parts of Africa. They'll go and destroy property. They will leave intestines and blood smeared to cause terror and fear. And then they start to take a much more violent bend as time goes on. They will, for example, you would be like a Kikuyu or a Kenyan living in part of out there, let's say outside Nairobi somewhere, and they could be even members of your immediate like family, not like immediate, but like extended members of your family, like a cousin or an uncle or something like that, or maybe like even like a servant in your house, or a helper that you might know. That's and what they start doing is they start going after Kenyan loyalists, who are people who, for example, like tribal leaders who are helping out the British. Remember, the British rule through indirect control. I mean, they will literally butcher kids in their sleep. It's some pretty brutal stuff. And so, after some very notable massacres, such as in Lyra and other places, this gets the British's attention. Now, let's talk about how we should understand them. There's a video here I highly recommend you watch, because it's very, very good at kind of helping you understand it, and I'll play clips of it for you in class. The interpretations of the Mau Mau and what they were range all over the place. The British, when they first start hearing about this and they start hearing about this oathing thing, they think it's actually like a form of like mental illness, that like it causes the Mau Mau to just like lose their senses. The oathing does, and eventually they start taking much different interpretations of it. They think it's an anti-modern, anti-Christian, because African Christian mercenaries were all over Kenya at this point, thanks to the British. They call it like this barbarism and terrorism. Other scholars, more recently in the past 50 or so years, have said no. The Mau Mau was a peasant revolt. It was a fights over land. Some people kind of referring back to the old British thing, like of this like mental illness, has said like, oh, the Mau Mau and the oathing was this. The literal quote is magico-religious response, or it was this what they thought was the collapse of their tribal systems. I think really, and this video tells you and kind of gives you good evidence for this. Here's probably the best way to understand the Mau Mau. It has very little to do with race. It is a civil war that pits Mau Mau, again, members of that ethnic group, the Kikuyu, against loyalists to the British colonial experience. And this all gets amplified by the British to a great degree. As the guy here tells you, only 32 Europeans are going to die in the entire Mau Mau rebellion. Not very many compared to the thousands of Africans that are going to die, whether they be Mau Mau or British loyalists. So again, I think looking at it as almost like a civil war is probably the best lens to do it through. So what I'd like you to do is, since we talked about lenses and how anti-colonial movements can be interpreted, if we took last time when we did France and Algeria, how could we look at that conflict through different lenses? And if we did so, like let's say we take the perspective of the OAS, what is the story of that colony going to look like? And I'd like you to kind of think about that, meditate on it, and we'll talk about it in class. But right, like a what's the story of Algeria from the perspective of the OAS? It's going to be an interesting answer. Now, what are the British going to do about the Mau Mau? Because this is a challenge to their power, right? Even though, again, the Mau Mau aren't super concerned with the British. That's not really their focus. The British are going to be on this thing because it is a threat to them. So the British, first of all, are initially actually really slow to respond. They declare first a state of emergency, and then we get what's called Operation Jock Scott. Jock Scott is pretty simple to understand. The basic premise of it is that the British believe the easiest way to put down the Mau Mau is to capture their leaders and to kind of just decapitate the movement, like cut the head off the snake. The problem, news about the op leaked out, and in the meanwhile, all of the very brutal British military tactics, like they dropped like 6,000 bombs in Kenya, and some pretty other terrible things they do, which we'll get to in a second, alienate most of the moderate Kikuyu, excuse me. What do I mean by alienate? That means that they, it kind of like turns them off to helping the British, and it encourages, again, a large percentage of Kikuyu to oath and to join up with the Mau Mau. They do capture a few leaders, including like one who's going to go on to be the first leader of Kenya after it becomes independent. They basically put him through a show trial, but they actually didn't really capture the actual Mau Mau leaders themselves. In the meanwhile, though, what's been going on is that the British military for 4 years goes ham on the Mau Mau in the forests of Kenya, which is one of the locations that they were kind of sourced in. Their other area of support, which is in Nairobi, which is considered to be like the other the other hotbed of Mau Mau, remained. Okay, and so let's talk about what they do with that. And that is Operation Anvil. And the British plan there, okay, Operation Anvil, is to literally just eliminate the Mau Mau in Nairobi in a single fell swoop. So there's a video here. Please watch it. It shows you how they did it in some pretty gratuitous stuff. And I won't spoil it for you. So please go check it out. So I'll go watch it so I can kind of reflect on it. So what do we think about that? The British using concentration camps and probably committing what we would call today war crimes. Some pretty terrible stuff. Again, you saw lots of things reflected there in the strategies that they used to root out the Mau Mau. And then basically what happens is that when the Mau Mau are crushed towards the end of the beginning, of the 1960s, then Kenya is going to get its independence in 1963, and we're kind of left at the end of the day, and this video kind of shows you that, what do we make of the Mau Mau? Was it effective? Did it work? Was it kind of a sideshow, and independence was going to happen anyways? Just based on pressure after World War II. I think probably the best answer that you can give for the Mau Mau is the consensus of, I think the general historians, they tend to agree that the Mau Mau accelerated, they're like a catalyst for independence. They helped the British realize that it's simply not worth the trouble of trying to hold on to Kenya. And it's kind of like a catalyst again in the scientific reaction. Would the reaction probably have happened anyways? Yeah, I think so. But it just sped it up. Also worth noting, the British government in 2013, so only 7 years ago, because this video is being recorded in 2020, or 2021, 8 years ago, admitted the use of torture and crimes and issued reparations to Kenya, around $25 million, which is woefully inadequate. But there you go. So to end the block, okay, I've got a little exit ticket here for you. Go ahead and do that. Okay, you'll realize it's pretty familiar once you do it. And then to end the block, you're going to do a little compare-contrast between how the British ran, because now we talked about 2 British colonies in Africa, Ghana and Kenya. I'd like you to compare-contrast with them. Now, you can do anything with the compare-contrast with the British and colonization. You can do it on how Native Africans resist. You could do it on the cultures, policies, events, objectives, motivations, consequences. You can take this so many ways. But when you click this right here, please click on the correct block. Okay, you just add the little, you click the little plus symbol, and then you add your idea. Please make sure you put your name on it so I can give you credit for it. And I'm really interested to see what you guys post about, because I want us to take some good time and actually do some good critical thinking on this. So until then, I'll see you guys later, and next block we'll be jumping into Rwanda. So bye-bye.